Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ulan Gaming, and I'm coming here with another tier list, this time for the heavy infantry. Now, this will complete the 5 core unit types that we have tier lists for, that being artillery, light and heavy cavalry, light and heavy infantry, but I won't be done yet. We'll also be going over the mercenaries and as well as the explorers. Now we all know how the explorer list is probably going to look like, but I really love using explorers in all my games to their max benefit, and I want to talk about them. So that is what we will be doing. But for now, once again, Aussie Drongo posted a tier list for heavy infantry a while ago, but he has since left the community, and his lists are now outdated due to update and balance changes, as well as 4 new civilizations that have come out since then. So I have taken it upon myself, as I am deeply immersed with the stats and multipliers of every single unit in this game, due to my work with the Age of Empires 3 companion app. And we will be going through these, taking new updates as well as the future pup notes into account for February, and of course looking at the new units available to the new civs that have come out since then. And with that, let's get started. We're going to start out right in the S tier, and we're going to be the first one that obviously comes to mind is the Ashigaru musketeer from Japan. The Ashigaru is a pretty expensive musketeer, but they have very solid base stats, and but the real treat to them, of course, is their 4.5 movement speed. They're very upgradable, as are all of Japan's units, due to combining the daimyo, shogun, consulate, Japanese isolationism upgrade, as well as the what is it called? The Golden Pavilion. That's the one. You can just combine all of these ores together and just get all of your units to be super good. The Ashigaru starts really good in the second age, and it ends really good in the last age, and there's just no stopping this guy. If Japan wants to make Ashigaru, by all means, let them. Our next S tier unit is going to be the Sepoy. Now, in the second age specifically, the Sepoy is the best musketeer in the game. They're a little cheaper than Ashigaru. They cost the same amount, but they're more food weighted instead of coin, which is better. And they also just have insane base stats. They have like 15 hand attack, and they have like 15 hand attack, just like the Janissary, but they still retain their 3 times multiplier against cav, so these guys are even more of melee cav-eating machines than normal musketeers are. And they have almost as much HP as the Janissary, only 30 less, but they have higher than normal attack. These guys are just absolute monsters. The biggest weakness to the Sepoy is that the biggest weakness to the Sepoy is that they're not super upgradable, and they tend to fall off right around the industrial age. But for their early game utility, they are just absolutely insane units. The next S-class that we're going to be putting here is the British Musketeer. British Musketeer, everyone would have seen this coming. The British Musketeer has 1,000,001 upgrades. They have 30% through cards alone, just in terms of upgrades. They also have the unique church card, which gives them the thin red line, which boosts them by 20% at the cost of movement speed, so it is a little bit of a give and take. On top of all that, they also, of course, have the Royal Guard upgrade, as well as any advanced arsenal improvements you want to make, should you send that card, and overall, they're just very, very strong. And for now, we're going to leave the S tier alone until actually we'll put the carolean in S tier as well. Now the carolean starts off kind of meh. They have less attack than a normal musketeer, so they do lose in the musketeer shootouts in the beginning of the game, but they also counter cavalry at range, which is fantastic. Not many musketeers do that. I think this is like the only one, with the exception of the Bolus Warrior, but I put the Bolus Warrior in the Dragoon video. Fight me. So the Carolean has a range multiplier, and they also have the highest melee attack of any musketeer in the game. I think they have like 20 or 21 base hand attack, and it just scales super hard, just like their ranged attack. And this comes, of course, with the big button ability that caroleans have on a cooldown that allows them to go into melee mode and charge in. And this really allows them to fight their counters with not necessarily cost effectively, but if you can shut down a giant mass of musketeers by charging them, that could win you the game right there, even if you're not trading effectively. And despite all of Sweden's nerfs that they have had, this is still one of the best musketeers in the game for this reason. That charge ability is absolutely amazing. There is a game that I will link the video I will link the video in the Discord. In the description of this video. But me and my brother had a game that's on his channel. Where the enemy had 2 falconets and they backed them up right next to their artillery foundry with a 5 falconet pops. They had 7 falconets while we were knee-deep in their base, and my brother just activated the charge ability on the caroleans, and with 22 caroleans, he obliterated all 7 falconets in like the blink of an eye. While they were getting fired on. He ended up still having like half of his mass too, so caroleans are able to just absolutely destroy their counters, but in short bursts with a long cooldown. But for that reason, we are going to put them up there. I do think that we will go over all of the ranged first, and then we will go over the melee, but both of those will be excluding the new units, which we will go over last. Now let's talk about just all of the musketeers in general. Starting with the Portuguese musketeer, which will go in A tier. The reason being is that the Portuguese musketeer pairs really well with the caçador, because they both counter different things and both gain stats from the same upgrade cards. So all the cards that you're going to be sending that upgrade your caçadors will also upgrade your musketeers. And they, of course, also... Yeah, they're just really, really solid. Portuguese musketeers are great. If Portugal player wants to make musketeers, by all means, let them. They'd probably be better suited for caçadors or dragoons, but I mean, they can still absolutely run musketeers. There's no problem with it, especially if they're running them with caçadors. Now, the Spain and France musketeer, they are both absolutely perfectly fine, usable units, an exemplary example of a normal musketeer. And as with all of our lists, if a unit is a perfect example of a standard unit that does its job well, but isn't S tier or anything like that, it goes in B. Because B tier, it does not mean you shouldn't use it. It just means that it's a perfectly fine, serviceable unit that's not exactly outstanding. That's not outstanding from its peers. It's just solid at its job. Going through this list, the Janissary. So the Janissary is going to be in A tier for much the reason that Sepoy is in H tier, and that is just that in the second age they dominate due to having high HP pools. The Janissary is very strong in the second age because of their high HP pool. They do have some good upgrade cards once you get to the later ages, and so they can remain pretty powerful throughout the whole game, but Sepoy are just absolutely monsters on the battlefield, and Janissaries don't quite approach Sepoy level. They're pretty close in terms of H2 usability, but they're not quite that. They will lose to a good skirmisher mass, whereas Sepoys will put up a lot bigger of a fight, just because of their much higher damage. And lastly, we'll talk about the Russian Musketeer, which we will put in C, mostly just because they are weaker than the normal Musketeer. They don't have anywhere near as many upgrade cards as several of the other Musketeers do, and when they hit the Fortress Age, they get their Veterancy upgrade. Their Veterancy upgrade gives them the stats of normal Musketeers in Age 2. It's really sad. They, of course, can train in batches of 5, which I view as more of a negative, but they are cheaper than the normal Musketeer. which is a good thing. Next, we'll talk about the Nizam Fusilier. Now, for what it does with all of its multipliers and its different stances, this thing would be S, because this thing counters the universe. You can throw anything at the Nizam Fusilier, and no matter what you throw at it, it'll have a 2x multiplier at range against you. And it's absolutely nuts. But you can only get them through a very specific strategy using the Ottomans, because you not only need to get to the Industrial Age, but you need to save all of your Janissary shipments. Because the Nizam Fusiliers are only available through shipments that are Janissary shipments that then turn them into Nizam shipments. I will put them probably at the very tip bottom of B, just because of their very bad availability and massability. But I do think they deserve a spot on this list, because you will see them. The Tomahawk is going to be in C with the Russian Musketeer. It will go higher than the Musketeer, just because it does have better stats, but ultimately the big thing hurting the Tomahawk is it has a weak attack for a Musketeer. It only has 19, which is the same as the Janissary, but it has the same HP pool, and it's more expensive in that it costs wood instead of coin. Now, it does technically cost a total of 5 less total resources than a normal Musketeer, but the fact that it costs wood instead of coin, it costs 20 wood instead of 25 coin, definitely bites it in the ass and really hampers on its usability past the very early game. I do believe that does it for all of the ranged heavy infantry that are not new units, new to the new civs. I just said new a lot there. So with that, let's start filling in the rest of this stuff. The Spain and Swedish pikemen are going to be higher than the pikemen for... This pikeman here represents the pikemen for all the other civs. Aussie Drongo did this in his video, and I definitely like that, because it just makes no sense to talk about pikemen a billion different times for a billion different civs when they're all pretty much the same. Pikemen, solid early game unit that pretty much just exists to chase cav out of your base with 5 movement speed, which can't quite catch them, and siege down buildings in the early game if you really need that kind of thing. However, the Sweden and Spanish pikemen are usable throughout the whole game due to having Royal Guard upgrades for them, as well as various upgrade cards. Sweden in particular gets Advanced Arsenal for free as a civ bonus, so you can get these guys to up to 6 movement speed, which is really fantastic, especially in the Second Age. So they will be going a little bit higher than the Spain Musketeer, but not much. I definitely don't think that they are out of the B tier, but they are absolutely usable throughout the whole game, especially because they do fill in a hole that Sweden has, just because the Carolean doesn't have the greatest siege in the world, and the pikemen can really help remedy this. So we're going to be putting... probably right here. I think that's a pretty good spot for them. They aren't ranged, which does put them at a distinct disadvantage over like all the Musketeer units. But I do think this is a very safe, easy spot for them. And the rest of the civilizations with their pikemen, sure, we'll throw them in D. You can use these to siege down buildings. You can use them to siege down torps. You can use them to defend your base from cavalry, but they're really not going to be doing anything more for that, and anything past the first 7 or 8 minutes of the game, you're going to want different units. Just point blank and period. They do have their use, they are important, but they're not they're not great. And let's continue the pikeman trend and talk about the Puma Spearmen available to the Aztecs. I would go so far as to say the Puma Spearmen is tied with the Plumed Spearmen for the best pikemen in the game. Now, I know what you're thinking, but wait, that doesn't sound right, but just hear me out here. The Puma Spearman has several things going for it. I'm actually probably going to put it right here, honestly. The Puma Spearman has several things going for it that normal pikemen do not. First of all, it just has higher base stats. Pikemen have 120, this thing has 125. Not huge, but what is huge is that it has a 50% damage boost over the standard pikeman. The standard pikeman has 8 damage at base. Pumas have 12, but they still retain the 5 times multiplier, meaning these guys do a very hefty 60 damage to hussars in the second age, which is just huge compared to the normal pikeman, which only does 20. This means that 2 pumas are going to be doing the work of 3 pikemen. But that's not the only thing that pumas have going for them. They also cost food coin instead of food wood, so you're going to be able to easily amass these throughout the entirety of the game, as food coin is just the better resource cost. And they also have a upgrade card in Age 3 that boosts their movement speed up to 6. Now, a lot of Aztec players don't run this card because your Age 3 cards as Aztec generally take up a lot of space and you won't have too much room, but if an Aztec player wants to go with lots of Puma Spearmen, that is something they can absolutely do, and I think it's something that is underused. Because these Pumas are just really, really good. They can get 6 movement speed, and with their extra high attack that they have and super large multiplier, I just don't see... I can't justify putting them any lower than the top of B tier. They also have the highest siege attack of any musketeer in the game, so maybe I'll put them towards the bottom of A, actually. They have the largest siege attack of any pikeman in the game as well. They have 41 siege at base, which is really, really high. And yeah, I think this might honestly just be a great place for them. Now, with that being said, the Plume Spearman is better. I just said that these might be tied for like the best. They are pretty much tied. The Plume Spearman has, by and away, it still has a large attack, just like the Puma Spearman over the normal pikeman. But unlike the Puma Spearman, which only just barely has more HP, the Plume Spearman has 170 base HP, 50 HP more than 50 HP more than the pikemen, and that is like a 40% boost in HP over pikemen compared to a 50% attack boost that the Puma Spearman has, and they're still pretty fast too. Another nice thing about them is that their speed upgrades in the form of Inca bridges and Inca road building affects all of the Inca units as opposed to just the Puma, like the Puma Spearman's card does. And you can these make a very good unit comp with the Jungle Bowman that the Inca has, which also costs the same amount, which also costs the same resources of food and wood, and they're extremely close in cost, in total cost as well. So you really just use one macro for both of your units for your for a really solid composition, and it just makes Inca. It's one of the reasons that Inca is so powerful in the Second Age. So for that reason, the Plume Spearman will be put up there, and that finishes out all of the pikemen, I do believe. Oh, let's talk about the Club Warrior. Club Warrior, it's a Lakota unit. The Club Warrior rush does exist because it can be unexpected, but it's unexpected because Club Warriors are outclassed by pretty much all of the other Lakota units, so I can't justify putting it any higher than C, probably below the Tomahawk and the Musketeer, just because Russia and Haudenosaunee are known for using Tomahawks and Musketeers, but but people who use Club Warriors for Lakota are the weird dudes who want to do something unexpected and funny, and that's about it. Granted, the Club Rush still is a good rush, and it is absolutely usable and doable, and it does have its place in the game. But I can't see putting it any higher than that. So now that we got all the pikemen out of the way, let's talk about the Halberdiers. So for starters, the Halberdiers as a whole did get better. They got a speed boost in a patch about a month and a half ago, I think, and it as a result. To their base speed boost, it does make Halberdiers as a whole better than they were. Particularly in the form of the Dutch Halberdier, which I would put just under the Puma Spearman in efficiency, because if Dutch wants to go H2 Halbs, they absolutely can, and the H2 Halbs come with the added benefits of... The H2 Halbs come with the added benefit of being an age 3 units with age 3 stats that are not degraded in any way available in the second age, and they scale based off of these age 3 stats. Dutch in particular has the ability to train these in the second age, as well as a first age card that boosts movement speed, which now boosts it even more so because of their speed boost. So the Dutch Halberdiers in the second age can have age 3 stats with very high movement speed, and they are a threat to anything they touch. And I definitely think that Halberdiers are an underutilized unit for Dutch players, and there should be a lot more people halbrushing than there are. And I'm glad there aren't, because it would be very scary if Dutch players really decided they wanted to go for age 2 halbs. But they're even viable in the late game because of some upgrade cards Dutch have, as well as having a Royal Guard upgrade in age 4. So they're usable throughout the whole game, and they can get really, really fast. And it's quite scary. Now, the France Halberdier, we're just going to put in the D tier with Pikemen, simply because there's no reason to ever make them as France. They are outclassed by every other unit France has, pretty much. Even the Pikeman, I would say, is better than the Halberdier, just because the Pikeman is available in the second age. At least you see the Pikeman used in some rushes as France, but they're just not great. Similar to Portugal and Russia. Portugal and Russia Halberdiers. I will put the Russia Halberdier just underneath the Russia Musketeer, because once again, you can't actually, with their buff, I might just put them above. But because once again, you may need to make Halberdiers as a Russia player, just because you might need some anti-cavalry that you otherwise can't get. Except for like their Manchu shipment in age 3, which will carry their anti-cav for like the entirety of the game. So you may need to make Russian halbs, but it doesn't make them great. They still have reduced stats, just like all of the Russian units. And the Portugal Halberdier, we will probably put at the top of C. You just don't see Portugal making Halberdier because they have better options. I will say that I don't think there are better options. I think their better options probably outclass France even more so. It probably outclass them even more so than France, because they have the Cassador and the Musketeer that goes super well with the Cassador, and you can basically get your anti-cavalry and your skirmisher upgrades all in one go, whereas with Halberdiers you will need separate cards for that. So we'll put the Portugal halbs at the bottom with France. There's a reason we never see them, is the point I'm getting at. Okay, so that takes care of the Pikemen. Let's get that takes care of the halbs. Let's get the speedy boys out of the way. Starting with the Repugnant. The Repugnant is going to go below the Pikemen, just because it is completely outclassed by the Sepoy. It is one of the only indie units that cost food wood, which isn't great. And for what it does, it is a high damage, fast anti-cavalry unit, kind of like the Rodolero, but it is very expensive for what it does. It costs 100 food and 35 wood, and that is just too much of a resource investment for that singular purpose, that they don't really do anything else. Rodoleros are probably A tier. We'll put them just above the Puma Spearmen, I think, because they do have a very fast movement speed. They have a 6 movement speed at base. We might put them below. It's hard. I think they're very comparable to the Puma Spearmen. They have 6 movement speed at base. They counter cavalry. They can chase them down quite well. They get their upgrades. They get upgrades that can make them even faster. We'll probably put it above the Puma Spearmen, honestly. If you're playing with a Spain player and they want to make Rodoleros, great, let them. Spain makes good Rodoleros. The problem being, they just like with all of the other pikemen, they do have a low attack in exchange for their multiplier against cavalry. And they also have really low siege, which, I don't know, maybe I am very torn between where to put these in terms of just under or just over the Puma. Because of personal bias, being an Aztec player, I think I will put the Rottleros below the Puma Spearmen. And I think that finishes that section up. Oh, let's talk about Quang and Changdao. Quang Pikemen, I don't know, I'm sure I'm butchering that, are a solid H2 pikeman that is tied to the Old Han army, and they're great, you know, Quang pikemen, just, you know, great unit. Once again, they suffer from being part of a banner army, which means they're tied to specific units when you want to make them, which does kind of hurt their late game viability past the second age. So because of that, we will be putting them probably right here. They do have a very high siege. So while they are, you know, decent, while they are decent pikemen, the fact that they are tied to banner armies just drags them down, just like the rest of Chinese units. Because you can't make just them. If you could make just the Quang pikemen, then perfect. Right there, you'd be probably above the Nizam Fusilier. But you can't, and that really hurts China. Well, pretty much all of China's units. Same with the Changdao. The Changdao is just better than the Quang pikemen. It's available in the Third Age. It's tied to better banner armies than the Quang pikemen is. It's definitely usable in the late game just because it's tied to better units in banner armies, but it is still part of banner armies, which of course hurt it immensely. So they can't. They are better than the Quang pikemen, but I can't justify putting them out of the C tier. Now we'll talk about the Jaguar Prowler, since they are a pretty unique unit. Yeah, Jaguar Prowler. So the Jaguar Prowler is a unique Aztec unit. It is a heavy infantry that you can make in the Second Age by using a card, the High Priest of Exilton, which does boost your Explorer attack. Meaning you could use the High Priests of Exilton plus the Chief Age Up and make Jaguar Prowlers in the Second Age along with the Aztec Swashbuckler attack, and have it be pretty decent as a combo. Jaguar Prowlers have a high attack, a high HP. They have 16 base attack, and a 3 times multiplier against heavy infantry, and a 2 times against cav. Which is weird because they are a heavy infantry unit that does counter cavalry, but what they counter harder than cavalry is every other unit on this board. And they do go into stealth, which means they can fight pretty well against their counters. It being skirmishers, you can get really close on the skirmishers and go into melee with them, where they do less damage to you, and you can get around their range resistance. But the big thing that hurts the Jaguar Prowler is, one, not having a ranged attack. I mean, that just goes for all of the pike units, the melee heavy infantry in general. But 2 is their cost. These guys are very, very expensive. They cost 30 food and 90 coin. And as an Aztec player, you generally won't have anywhere close to the same amount of coin as you will food gatherer. And it just makes the Jaguar Prowlers very, very difficult to mass. It really does hurt the Jaguar Prowler quite a bit. The Aeronites are also coin heavy, but it's okay because you don't need anywhere near as many Aeronites to do their job as you do the Jaguar Prowler Knight. So we will be putting the Jaguar Prowler probably below the Spain and Swedish pikemen right here. I think this is a pretty fair spot for them. They absolutely have their use. They have the big button ability from the town center. They are veteran units that can be chained in the Second Age, just like the Dutch Halberdier. But specifically their cost is what drags them down, in my opinion. And it's just very difficult to mass Jaguar Prowlers, especially when towards the end of Aztec late game, you don't really need any more anti-cavalry / anti-musketeer units, because you got all of that in the form of the Eagle Runner Knight, who costs the same amount of food and coin. And is therefore easier to mass, and so I just think the Jaguar Prowler Knight shouldn't be here, just because it shouldn't be super high, just because it is outclassed by other units that it has to compete with. Now we'll talk about the big scary guys who will dominate everybody they get close to, assuming they ever get close. Starting with the Doppelsoldner from Germany. Now, the Doppelsoldner is a very scary German unit that, much like the Dutch Halberdier, does not get anywhere near enough screen time from players in the game. If I was gonna, I don't really play Germany, but if I did, I would play Germany specifically for like using Dops a lot. These guys can get very fast, very, very quickly. In the Second Age, they can reach 5.8 movement speed. And just like the samurai, they have attack. They have splash on their attack, and they will just kind of fuck up anything that gets close to them. And you have to respect the Doppelsoldner mass if you see the Doppelsoldner mass. Now, I did do some side by side comparisons between Doppelsoldners and samurais throughout every age, counting all of their upgrades. And basically, Doppelsoldners are like tankier samurais, and samurais are like more damaging Doppelsoldners. And the HP and damage difference between the two of these is night and day. They're both very upgradable through various cards. They both cost the same amount of resources, but the Doppelsoldner is very, very, very tanky. And it will still do so much damage because of its splash that you don't really need the extra damage that the samurai does. And I definitely think if Germany was going to go with Dops, then it is absolutely a scary thing that you need to be very careful of, especially because of their high movement speed. So we'll be putting them just underneath, just over, actually, the Dutch Halberdier, because they are available from the Second Age from the get-go without you having to send a card. Now, as I mentioned, the Samurai is pretty comparable to the Doppelsoldner. Oh, right, I also forgot to mention, Doppelsoldners are super upgradable to their stats through their various cards, and they have one in the Fortress Age, which, at the cost of a ton of your movement speed, which I do think is worth it, assuming you have gotten the other movement speed cards. The card gives them an Imperial upgrade's worth of stats, 50% HP and attack. Absolutely crazy. Now, the Samurai is a more damaging but less tanky Doppelsoldner, and they are very good. But the primary problem with Samurai is there is almost never a reason that you would want to pick the Samurai over the Ashigaru Musketeer. One of the reasons that Dops are really good with Germany is because it fills the hole. It fills a unit hole for Germany that is heavy infantry, because Germany does not have a musketeer. But Japan does have a musketeer, and so the Samurai has to compete with that. And because of that, it is significantly lower on the list. You do still see them, and I definitely think they are better than Tomahawks, but we're going to place them right here, I think, and that is where they're going to stick. If you like using Samurai, just use Ashigaru instead. Next is the Maceman, available to the Inca. The Maceman is going to be down here, lower than a little higher than the Halberdiers, but lower than the Rajaput, I think. The Maceman is a 3-pop, it's like a 3-pop samurai, except that it doesn't... Inca has so many better units to pick from that outclass the Maceman, that the Maceman has to compete with, that it really is kind of a shame, because the Macemen have fantastic sound effects and animations. They just go bonk, bonk, bonk whenever they attack, and it's really great to listen to. But ultimately, the best use I find for Macemen usually is transforming them into light cannons if you're doing some sort of goofy Tupac rebellion strat with Inca, which I do recommend giving a shot by massing Macemen and Chimu specifically to turn them all into Hussar and light cannons. It's a very fun strat that it's not meta or anything, but it's a very fun strat that I do think you should give a try. And then lastly, we have the Aztec Skull Knight. Now, if you have seen some of my videos on Aztec, you'll know that I am a huge fan of the Skull Knights. And I have absolutely zero qualms once you get to the Industrial Age, with just switching it off the XP dance and putting it onto the Skull Knights anyways. By the time you reach the Industrial Age, you'll probably have most of your shipments anyways, so it doesn't really hurt you that much, because Aztec just gains so much XP between their warrior priests and the Explorer. So the Skull Knight is just an absolute monster. It's Shadow Tex. It's available in each age. It gains benefit from all of the Knight combat cards. It doesn't gain benefit from Scorched Earth, but it does gain benefit from all of the Knight combat cards. And they have a upgrade card that boosts their movement speed to 4.5. As well as all of their the splash on all of their attacks from 2 to 3. Which is just an absolutely terrifying prospect. Put simply, if you send that card that ships 11 Skull Knights and gives them movement speed and splash, if your Skull Knights touch anything, it will die. Point blank, period. Now, 4.5 isn't a ton of movement speed, but you can remedy this by utilizing the Aztec Explorer to snare enemies, which is what most Aztec players do anyways, because the Explorer is super integral to the Aztec playstyle. And as a result of that, I think I will be putting the Skull Knight. It's even used in like their H2 rushes. And the Skull Knight, if touching anything here, would win in a fight. Point blank, period. Skull Knights, just if they touch something, they win. And as a result, I do think we will be putting the Skull Knight probably right here. Just because they are a little bit hard to train, I do think that overall the Puma Spearman is better. Well, no, because the Puma Spearman lose against a lot of the things that Puma Spearmen lose to, whereas Skull Knights just demolish everything they touch. I don't think they're better than the Plume Spearmen, just because Plume Spearmen are easy to mass with the Jungle Bowmen, which make a great unit comp throughout the entire game. So I think this is where we will be putting the Aztec Skull Knight. And with that, that leaves all of the new units available to the newer civs. So first is the Regular. For the longest time, I thought the Regular had identical stats to the normal Musketeer, with the exception of its +2 range. This actually isn't true. It actually has higher attack than the normal Musketeer. Normal Musketeers have 23 attack, and the Regular has 25, which means that it only takes 7 Regulars to one-shot a villager, as opposed to the 8 you would need with Musketeers. Which is a definite note in their benefit in the second age especially. It also means they get more benefit from combat cards. USA does have a combat card for regulars that boosts all heavy infantry as well as the Explorer by 15% for both HP and attack. Now, the Regular is a little bit more expensive than the Musketeer. It costs 5 extra resources in grand total, and is also evenly distributed between food and coin. 55 food, 50 coin, as opposed to the 75 food and 25 coin that the Musketeers cost. I do think, as an Age 2 unit, the Regular is a better option, because the range will allow them to even kite Musketeers a little bit before they go into all-out shootouts. Just a little bit, though. And I do think that the Regular is a very, very solid option throughout pretty much any point in the game. And for that reason, we will be putting the Musketeer probably at the top of B class. We might put the Dutch Halberdier right here, actually. I think that might be a better place for them. The USA Musketeer... Oh, it also combos well with the Gatling gun, which is something I forgot to mention. So maybe we'll actually boost them up a little bit. Perhaps like right here, or even here. Something like this. I think that's a good spot for the Regular. Now, let's talk about the Gaskenya and Maigadi. The Gaskenya is the Ethiopian Musketeer. It is a ranged heavy infantry. It counters in melee. It has 1.5 attack speed. It has a little lower attack and HP than the normal Musketeer. And it also costs food wood. Its advantage is that it's pretty cheap in the early game, but pretty much when you're playing Ethiopia, the second you get out of the Commerce Age, you're going to stop making these in exchange for probably Neftenia Javelin Rider as your main unit comp with some Sebastopol mortars thrown in. So I do have I do have an issue justifying putting it anywhere outside probably the top of C tier. This is just my personal opinion, but I don't think the Gascania are great. They are cheap, it is true, but they are also weak, just like the Russian Musketeer. They are notably better than the Russian Musketeer, just in terms of stats and attack, as well as the fact that they don't batch train, which is a massive benefit to any unit. But I do think that is probably the best place for them, because Ethiopia does have better options once they get outside the Second Age. As for the Maigadi, so the Maigadi is the Hausa heavy infantry unit, and the Maigadi is available at the Palace, and it costs 200 export, which is quite a bit, but Hausa have lots of upgrades available to the Maigadi, and the Maigadi base stats absolutely smash. They have like 41 base attack or at range or something stupid like that, and even have a multiplier against mercenaries, which is better than pretty much any other musketeer can say, just because they don't have any multipliers at all. I mean, it won't do you a ton of good, but like, hey, multiply against mercenaries, why not? I'll take it, you know? They cost 200 export, which is very expensive, but Hausa has a card that both all-in-one boosts the Maigadi stats, as well as transitions their cost from 200 export to 100 export, 100 coin, which is a much easier macro to go for. And I think Maigadi, especially the H2 Maigadi play, is something that we don't see nearly enough from Hausa players, and is something that has lots of potential, I think, for build orders. However, just because they are very expensive as units, we'll probably put them just under the Jaguar Prowler Knight. Just like the Nizam Fusilier, you can... I think this is a pretty good pairing, actually. Just like the Nizam Fusilier, you can absolutely make very strong Maigadi build orders, but it's a little niche and requires some planning. But it is doable, and it is effective. So I think that's a pretty good spot. They also shadow tech, just like the Nizam Fusiliers. So yeah, I think they're pretty comparable. Now, the Soldado and the Insurgente. Once again, this is taking the February pup into account. With the February pup, Soldados are getting nerfed. Among other things, their grenade launcher ability that they get in the Industrial Age is getting nerfed. But the Soldado is very comparable to the Hussar in stats, in terms of HP and attack, and it costs 2 population and is more expensive than a normal Musketeer. However, it is cheaper than 2 Musketeers, which is something that does need to be stated. And basically, the Soldado is, in a sense, in terms of overall DPS in a shootout, the equivalent of 2 Musketeers. Me and my friends went into some matches to try to compare Soldados to Musketeers, and a pop of 3 Soldados will beat out a pop of 5 Musketeers, but they will always lose to 6 Musketeers. And likewise, they will beat out 9 Musketeers, but they lose to 10. So Soldados actually lose to Musketeers in equal population, but just barely win out over just less than that. And the fact that they are much easier to mass population-wise, just because they do they do take up 2 population, is a huge benefit for the Soldado. They're also very upgradable. With the Advanced Church card, you can get a 15% boost to attack and HP for free in exchange for a 30% increase to their train time. Now, this is taking the February pup notes into account, because at the moment they actually get 20% attack and hit points and get a 40% train time increase. Also, the grenade attack is something that usually activates at extra range, so it has 14 range as opposed to the 12 of a normal attack, and if they are at range, they will fire the grenade attack, which has splash, which is really, really good. You don't need me to tell you that. They are changing it though, so that the grenade launcher is becoming a charged action with a 15-second cooldown. It's 15 or 18 seconds, one of the two. So that is a nerf that's coming to the Soldado, but in any case, just because if somebody gets a 5 Soldado pop in H2, it is a very big threat that needs a lot of investment to try to counter. Especially just because it's tricky countering the Soldado, because you see 10 Soldado, and if you saw 10 Musketeers, you might make like 7 or 8 skirms and they'll take care of it. But if you try to throw 7 or 8 skirms against 10 Soldado, you're throwing 7 or 8 skirms at 20 Musketeers. And so it's tricky to wrap your head around the fact that, wait, I need way more skirms than I actually think I do. And just because of that mental pressure, I will put them in the S tier. Probably above the Carolean. And lastly is the Insurgente. Insurgente are a very solid unit. They're really weak. They're really fast. They have low siege. They're kind of like the Rodolero in terms of unit archetype, but they're super weak, like way weaker than the Rodolero. Their advantage, though, they have 2 main advantages. One is that they're really cheap and only cost 1 resource. They only cost 65 food. And the other super big advantage that Insurgentes have is that you can train them in batches of 10. Now, they do counter cavalry, but that's not really the role that Insurgentes play. The real role of the Insurgente is just to get up in your opponent's face and waste their time by being meat shields for your enemy to attack, while you wail into them with bigger units that you need to keep alive, like the Soldado. And that is the real purpose of the Insurgente, and it does fulfill that job very well. They are getting buffed in February as well, and I am inclined to put them above the Spain and Swedish Musketeer, but below the Spain and Swedish Pikemen, but below the standard Musketeer. I think that's a pretty decent spot for them. And here we have our list, and I just realized that this is pretty much this looks like super balanced. We have the S tier at the top with the least amount, the D tier at the bottom with the most amount, and the average quality units in the center. And this actually looks like really, really good as a tier list. It's very visually pleasing to me. So thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are not done with the tier lists. We will be going over Explorers next, and then finally Mercenaries, and then that'll all be done. I'm not going to go over Natives. That's too much of an undertaking.